Well, I'm starting this series, God is Not Dead. And the reason is because I am so tired of the abuse that Christians are getting in not only in the media, but especially in the classroom. And there is this mockery of Christians as being pre-scientific or anti-scientific or anti-intellectual. So what I want to do is start a new series to give you really simple evidence that science gives you that proves God exists. And what I want to do in this series is to show you that science is the friend of Christianity, but actually the adversary of atheism. And what I want to give you is, in this series, are questions atheists cannot answer. And they don't want you to know those questions. So I'm going to begin today with one of the most basic questions of all that an atheist cannot answer. And that is, why is there something and not nothing? This is a fundamental question of philosophy and science. By that I mean, why is there a universe? And remember, the universe is everything material that there is. Quasars, stars, planets, everything that's material is the universe. There's nothing left out of the material universe except the supernatural, which the atheist denies there is the supernatural. So what it wants to say is the universe is everything that is, and there's nothing beside it. I want to show you that they cannot explain the existence of the universe, whereas Christians can. And that science is on the side of Genesis 1. And that's where I want to begin today. This is one of those times when I wish you'd bring your Bible so you could write notes in. Because this first sentence of the Bible is a blockbuster. In the beginning. One of the things you must understand is that the idea that the universe had a beginning is devastating to an atheist. Devastating. But science has proven it is true. It used to be believed, even through Einstein, that the universe was eternal. It was with Hubble in the 1920s and others that they began to see that they began to prove scientifically that there was a beginning of the universe. It's called the Big Bang. It is part of the credo of science today, and I'm going to talk about that in my message. The Bible is the only religious book, or book of religion, that says this. Now, once in a while, if you watch the History Channel, which drives me crazy, they will start telling you that Genesis was really plagiarized from other creation myths of other cultures. And the chief one you'll hear about is the Gilgamesh, the Babylonian Gilgamesh creation story. Now, when I was at Princeton, my professors, unbelievably, were unbelievers. And we really studied the Gilgamesh epic. The Gilgamesh epic says that Marduk, the chief god, goes into battle against Tiamat, the goddess, and slays her and cuts her up with his sword, and then from the parts of her body creates everything that is. Okay? The Egyptian creation myth, Ra, is the God who creates the universe out of spit and semen. This is quite different. There's no connection going on here, okay? So don't believe that. In the beginning, God, this word is incredible. There are several words for God. The one that's used here is Elohim. It's the plural form of a noun. But it's not polytheism that's being taught here. The next word is bara in Hebrew, created. God created. It's the singular form of the verb that's used. So what we're talking about here right off is the Trinity. And in the next sentence, we're going to read about the Spirit of God hovered over the darkness. This is really quite incredible. In the midst of a polytheistic world, everybody believed in many gods. Genesis 1 begins with a singular God and the beginning of time and creation. This is unbelievable, and atheists cannot answer this. Okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is everything. The universe, okay? The heavens and the earth. The universe. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. Do you get that? He doesn't lift his finger. He just speaks, an utterance. His word, and it happens. That's going to be really important later on. He just speaks, and the universe begins. The utter power of this God. Okay? Now, what's incredibly important is the stars are not created until the fourth day in verse 14. Wait a minute. How can there be light without suns, stars, quasars, other things like that? How can there be light? They're not created till the fourth day. How do you explain that? Let there be light. In other words, Genesis is teaching that the beginning of time and the beginning of everything that is material started with light. Okay? We want to talk about the science of that in just a little bit. Okay? Now I'm going to move over to 1 Peter. And it's 1 Peter 3, and verses 14 and 15 I wish you'd underline. And this is incredibly disturbing that so many Christians will say, they won't give a reason for their faith. They don't have a reason. They just say, I believe. I just believe. And I want you to know the Bible says that's insufficient and unbiblical to just say, I believe. We are called to have reasons for our faith. And the reason this is so important to me is that it's unendingly disturbing to me that many Christians are anti-intellectual. That somehow or another, the intellect is sub-spiritual. And I would just remind us that it is God who created the mind and logic. And the universe, the laws of the universe are logical and predictable, intelligent. So, that's so important. We must be intelligent about what we believe. In verse 14 it says, but even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear. Do not be frightened. But in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope, that is the faith that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Now, there are Christians who will argue their faith and they are not gentle and they're not respectful. They're uncivil. And that is an embarrassment to Christ. Okay? Even if you're right, don't lose respect for a person no matter what they believe. Okay? But we're to be prepared. Peter says to the early church, he dies in 66 BC, AD. He says, give a reason for your faith. Why? Because Christianity was under attack from all quarters. How can you believe in the resurrection? How can you believe God became human? How can you believe he rose from the dead? Etc., etc. And Peter's saying, don't tell them, well, I just believe. Give them the reasons for these beliefs. And that's the purpose of this series. Before he died recently, Sam Harris was an influential atheist. And he regarded Christians with contempt. In fact, he devoted an entire book to expressing his contempt. He titled it Letter to a Christian Nation. And in it, he literally calls for a jihad against Christianity. He says, science must destroy Christianity. Richard Dawkins, a zoologist at Oxford University and probably the best known evangelist for atheism, wrote in his book, The God Delusion, quote, if you meet anyone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane. The tone of that characterizes what the Wall Street Journal has called militant atheism. Militant atheism. It regards Christians as ignorant, as unscientific, as pre-scientific, as, well, stupid. Dawkins says, quotation marks, I quote, there is no scientist worth his salt who believes in God, who believes God exists. Really? Academic degrees are no protection against nonsense. I just simply invite you to Google Christian Scientists, and you will find popping up on your screen an almost endless list of some of the most famous scientists of all time, including the present day, who are believers, Christians, believers in the Bible and in Jesus Christ. Now that's important because the myth out there is that science is contrary to Christianity, that it is the enemy of Christianity, that it contradicts and disproves Christianity. It is a myth, and the proof that it is a myth is on your computer screen when you Google Christian Scientists. Because legions of scientists find no conflict between their discipline and their belief in Christ. So what should you say the next time someone says science disproves Christianity? Say, well, let's go to my computer and Google Christian Scientists. Obviously, all of these scientists do not find science disproving their faith. Or take Alistair McGrath. He's the name you might want to write down and go to Amazon.com and look at his prodigious output in writing. He is a professor of science and religion at Oxford University. I've heard him lecture several times while I've been there on sabbatical. Alistair McGrath has 3 PhDs from Oxford. 3. To say he is brilliant is to state the obvious. He has a PhD in molecular biophysics, which combines all of those disciplines. He has another PhD in theology and another PhD in intellectual history, that is, the history of ideas and thought. He was a committed atheist until science, his discipline of molecular biophysics, converted him to belief in the Bible and Jesus Christ. He has frequently debated Dawkins, the author of The God Delusion at Oxford, until most recently. And now Dawkins refuses to debate him. And the reason is Dawkins' PhD in his discipline is merely zoology, whereas McGrath is in the right discipline of cells in molecular biophysics, and he's just simply outgunned. Don't let anyone tell you that being a Christian is unintelligent. I can't bring every book I've read on this issue up to the platform, but One of the very best that I read last week is called Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions. Copies of it and several other books I recommend are at the resource counter after the service. It's written by David Berlinski. Now, Berlinski is not a household name except among scientists. He is one of the world's most famous mathematicians and scientists. And I assume that you know that mathematics is the language of science. Things now are not discovered by telescope. They're first, the universe is explained and known through mathematics. So he is a brilliant person. He is also a secular Jew. He says he does not pray and he cannot remember anything that he was taught in preparation for his bar mitzvah. But he writes this book, which actually has tongue-in-cheek humor. It's really quite funny. He writes this book because he said he's just tired of some scientists mocking belief in the existence of God, using specious or false arguments. And so he is devastating to Dawkins and others. And I recommend this book to you, whether you're a believer or seeker or an atheist. But if you're an atheist, I need to warn you of something C.S. Lewis said after he became a Christian. And he, by the way, became a Christian because Christian professors at Oxford, brilliant men like J.R. Tolkien and others, Dawson and others, got him reading G.K. Chesterton and some other Christian books. And eventually, as he read these arguments, he became a Christian. And afterwards, after he became a believer, he wrote his autobiography, Surprised by Joy. And he has this stunning sentence in it. He says, anyone wishing to remain an atheist cannot be too careful about the books he avoids reading. If you're a committed atheist and you really do not want to countenance the existence of the biblical God, avoid this book. There's another stunning book that I read last week in preparation for this series, and it's by the world's most famous atheist, who now is a Christian, a believer in God. His name is Anthony Flew, and this book is called There Is a God. He crosses out no, because he used to be an atheist. There is a God. How the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. Oh my gosh. I remember reading, he's now in his 80s, and he changed his mind in 2002. But if you Google him, you'll find multiplicity of publications, over 30 books that mock Christianity. And now he writes a book about how he believes God exists. This caused within the atheistic, intellectual atheistic community, hysteria. Because he is the patron saint of Dawkins, of all intellectual atheists. How could he betray the jihad against belief in God? I remember reading him when I was a philosophy major. At Stanford, one of his most famous books, it's simply titled God and Philosophy, with his arguments. I was a new Christian, and I was just open to all sides of view. And it was against belief. So the question you have to ask is, why does the world's most famous atheist become a believer in the existence of God? What changed his mind? He did not have some mystical experience. He was not on peyote or some of the things you've been on when you were in college. No, none of this happened. The simple answer from him is science. And specifically, the discovery of the Big Bang, which I want to speak about in a minute. In this series of messages, my aim is to show that science is the friend of the Bible and Christianity, not the enemy, in spite of all that you've heard. Always remember this. Just because most people believe it doesn't make it true. At one time, medicine thought the way you healed people was to bleed them. Probably that's why Mozart died. And at one time, most everybody believed the earth was flat, and they were flat wrong. So just because everybody believes it doesn't make it true. Even Christians. There are things that some Christians believe, even a lot of Christians, that are just not true. So what propels me in this is to show that science is actually the adversary to atheism. And that is why that it is friendly towards the Bible and Christianity is the only explanation of why legions of famous scientists are believers in Christ and the Bible. Find no contradiction. What propels me in this is something that, one of the things I do remember from being a philosophy major was reading Plato when he quotes Socrates as saying, "Dare to follow the evidence wherever it leads." And that's an operating principle in my life. It started way back then. Dare to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And I've said to you many times, as a believer, I am never afraid of the evidence. And that's why on my sabbaticals, the study of archaeology, the study of intellectual history, and so on, and all I do is get more sure of the accuracy of the scriptures. Dare to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And I hope that you will do that, and that this will encourage especially students in high school and those going to college, because what we find is that so many young Christians go off to college and they lose their faith in their first encounter with an aggressive atheistic professor. And they're unprepared intellectually to deal with the issues, because so many churches and so many youth groups are really not wrestling with the real intellectual issues of belief. It's focused on how to have a good relationship with your girlfriend and don't get angry, and that's as far as it goes. We must prepare our young people intellectually to give a reason for their faith and not to be coward. And that's 1 Peter 3:15, which I read to you earlier today, says we are to be prepared to give reasons for our faith. In other words, it is unbiblical and unfaithful to simply say, I just believe. That is inadequate and insufficient according to the Bible. We are called as believers to be intellectual, be able to give intelligent reasons for our belief. Now, I also hope that I'm speaking to some of us who are atheists or agnostics. And, I commend you for even being here. It shows some openness to follow the evidence, or to at least give it a hearing. But I do have a tiny dare. I hope you'll stay through the whole series and consider it. But my tiny dare is that you will read Berlinski's The Devil's Delusion or any of the other books out there. Dare to read them and consider really high-powered intellectuals and their argument for the existence of God. At least consider it. So what is the scientific evidence for the existence of God? The first is this. Science has proven the universe is not eternal. It had a beginning. That causes apoplexy in atheists. It's devastating. Since Greek and Roman times, and even previously, it has been believed that the universe is eternal. The atheist Carl Sagan wrote, and I quote, "The universe is eternal. There never was a time the universe did not exist." Now, what is the implication that the universe always existed? Well, that's a very convenient belief, because if that's true, there's no room for God. And in fact, that's exactly the argument that was made. God is unneeded to explain the existence of the universe. But science has proven him wrong. There is a beginning to the universe. There is a time in which the universe did not exist. And this is choking atheists. And you'll see that as I develop this, their reaction to it. But it is now part of the science, of the body of science that is undisputed. It's undisputed. The universe, there was a time when nothing existed, because the universe is everything. Now stick with me. The universe is everything material that it is. If the universe did not exist, there was nothing material that existed. Nothing is nothing. Flew, the former atheist I referred to, world's most famous atheist, wrote, "Of all the discoveries of science, the greatest discovery is the discovery of God." Oh, science discovered God? Let that rattle around. What he means is logically, and this is very simple. It's very simple what I'm about to say, but it's devastating to anyone who says there is no God. Whatever begins to exist must have a cause, because nothing cannot cause something. Nothing cannot cause something. Nothing cannot create something. Just as a man cannot be his own father. The universe, because he doesn't exist, so how could he father himself? The universe could not be its own creator. So if the universe could not create itself, because nothing cannot create something. This is not that complicated, is it? Nothing cannot create something, because nothing's there to do anything. Do you see that? Nothing's there to do anything. So since nothing cannot create something or anything, there had to be a cause outside of the universe that is eternal and before time. Now, stick with me. The beginning of the universe is the beginning of history and of time and space. Space and time. That's what it means. Before the universe began, there was nothing. There was no space. This is hard for us to imagine. There was no space and there was no time, because nothing was here. Time began with the beginning of the universe. That means that if the universe could not create itself, there had to be something outside of the universe that caused it to come into being. And that something is eternal, because it was before time began. And it is uncreated. It is God. Now, I'll just throw this in for free this morning. Dawkins, to get just how desperate Dawkins becomes. This is the question. When Dawkins is driven to the wall by McGrath and others, Dawkins in debate is actually asked, well, then who created God? Which is nonsense. By its very definition, to be outside of time and pre-time is to be eternal, because you were before time. And God, the Christian God, is uncreated. He is eternal. He is outside and before time. And remember the name that God gave of himself to Moses and later Jesus claimed? Do you remember Moses asked him his name? And what was the answer? I am. I'm eternal. There never was a time I was not, never will be a time I'm not. I am. Right at the core of the claim of God. Well, anyway, nothing cannot create something. There was a time when there was nothing. The universe was not here. And Flew says that's the greatest discovery because it leads to God. Now, the devastating question to ask an atheist professor is simply this: why is there something and not nothing? You need to think about that. Why is there something and not nothing? In other words, why is there the universe? Because the universe cannot explain itself and it can't create itself, so why is it here? Nothing cannot create something, and it sounds very much like the first sentence in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, there was a beginning. What we're speaking of is what science calls the Big Bang. And you see on the screen just a drawing of the beginning of the universe, which was an explosion of light. Everything that exists materially, science now knows as a scientific fact. This is not theory. It began at the Big Bang. All that is matter, all the mass of the universe came into being. And the beginning of space happened at that moment in a millisecond. There was nothing, and bang, the universe began. And at incredible speed, mass was created. And what they have discovered is that the universe is expanding, but it began as light. Gee, that sounds like verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," before there were any stars. Science has proven, this is scientific fact, that the universe is expanding. Galaxies are traveling away from one another in speeds of excess of 200 million miles an hour. That's fast. 200 million miles. The universe, space, is expanding at that rate. Now, scientists say if the galaxies are moving farther and farther apart at such great speeds, it means once they were closer and closer together. That's not rocket science. It just is obvious. They were closer together. In fact, scientists will say now that we can go backwards and picture the Big Bang, the beginning of the universe, and it's a cone, and it's on your screen. We're at the outside, at the top of the cone that's expanding at 200 million miles an hour. But that expansion can go back not infinitely. It has to come to a point, a beginning. That's real important. So there is not infinite regression. There is a beginning point. Now, Stephen Hawking, you know, the very famous Cambridge astrophysicist. You've probably seen his book, A Brief History of Time. It was a bestseller. He's the guy in the wheelchair, that can't speak. He's totally paralyzed, works through a computer. He wrote in A Brief History of Time, and I quote, "Many people do not like the idea that time had a beginning because it smacks of divine intervention." Exactly. Now, what you're seeing as you read, you delve into the literature, is a priori convictions. That is, I'm committed that there cannot be a God, and I'm going to do whatever I need to make sure that God doesn't exist. So when this Big Bang, the beginning of the universe, began, it caused apoplexy within the atheistic community. Hawkins has written another book, just recently. It's called The Grand Design, in which he claims the universe was self-created. It created itself, and it did so by gravity. He said gravity was the way the universe created itself because it brought specks of matter together and began to form the masses we find in the universe. What's the problem with that argument? It's circular. It begs the question. First, where do the little bits of matter come from? Your assumption is a circular argument. But most importantly, this is what is so incredible to me. Gravity cannot exist without mass. There has to be mass for gravity. That natural law is non-existent if there is not mass creation. I'll give you an example. Jupiter, fantastic discovery. Jupiter is such a massive planet that its gravitational pull is enormous. And it's positioned just perfectly to intercept all these meteors and asteroids that would crash into the Earth, except it sucks them into itself. It's like a shield through its massive gravitational pull because of its mass. Black holes. Why do black holes just suck everything that comes within range into them and they disappear? Because they're the densest matter in the universe. Gravity cannot function without mass, so it's a circular argument. Nothing cannot produce something. I want you to think about this claim that the universe was self-creating, which is being rejected as nonsense. Nonsense can even be said by PhDs. Think about this claim. I put it on the screen. Nothing can create itself to exist since it is nothing and does not exist. Nothing can't do anything. It cannot be causal because nothing is there to cause anything. What does not exist cannot cause anything to happen since it does not exist. Therefore, the universe could not have caused itself to exist. Ergo, therefore, a creator must exist. That's why this discovery of the beginning of the universe is so traumatic to unbelief. Do you follow what I'm saying here? Nothing can do nothing. Nothing cannot cause something to exist because it's not there. This is a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Why do I believe God exists? Because science has proven a beginning to the universe. There was a time when there was nothing, but nothing cannot create anything, and therefore science proves there must be a creator who is eternal and outside of time. So the question to ask the atheist professor is, how can nothing create something? And I guarantee you he will want to change the subject. Secondly, science proves God exists because of the discovery that the universe is fine-tuned for human life. Fine-tuned for human life. Let me recommend another book. It's called Rare Earth. It's by Ward and Brownlee. Ward is a well-known geologist, and Brownlee is a well-known astronomer and a member of the National Academy of Sciences. This book is so fascinating because what it shows is there are hundreds of scientific constants, like the force of gravity, like the speed of the expansion of the universe. If the universe was expanding at a faster rate or a slower rate by 1 × 10⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻ to 686 power, so I forgot exactly what it is. It'd collapse in itself. That's 686 zeros behind one. That's more money than Donald Trump has by a long shot. That's a big number. Life in this universe is on a razor-thin edge. And there are hundreds of factors that come together that all have to be just right or there's no life. And this book, a geologist and this astronomer described that. I'll give you just a few. The tilt of the Earth's axis. If it wasn't just so, the Earth would freeze or burn up. The magnetic field of the Earth that protects us against cosmic radiation that would kill us, the magnetic field, which is unique in our solar system at least. The thickness of the Earth's crust. All of these things, even the orbit of the Earth, which is different from the other planets in our solar system, make it possible for life. But you know what really is interesting is tectonic plates is something very rare, and the Earth has tectonic plates. That means, you heard of continental drift. There are 8 of them. And that means the continents are slowly shifting on the Earth. And what that does is recirculate carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. That makes possible air in our universe. But you know what it makes possible? The water in your swimming pool. Without this happening, water could not stay on the surface of the Earth. But most importantly, the tectonic shifts, the plates shifting, produce the Earth's most potent defense system, which is the magnetic field of the Earth, which keeps us from being killed by cosmic radiation. Who would ever think of that? All these factors say that the universe has been fine-tuned for life. Paul Davies, he's an agnostic. He is not favorable towards Christianity. He's a mathematical physicist. Remember, math is the language of science, the discovery. Astonishingly admits, and I quote, "Scientists are slowly waking up to an inconvenient truth. It seems that somebody, person, not a natural force, has fine-tuned the universe for human life. The impression of design is overwhelming," end of quote. That's from an agnostic. I'm not quoting any Christians in this whole message. Those who are unbelievers. Physicist Freeman Dyson, and I quote, "The more I examine the universe and study the laws of nature, the more evidence I find that the universe knew we were coming." I could multiply quotes like that from scientists for pages. It is part of the scientific, undisputable canon that the universe is fine-tuned for you to be alive. One more, Sir Frederick Hoyle. He's a committed atheist and one of the world's most famous physicists. Says, "Nothing has shaken my atheism as much as this discovery of the universe being fine-tuned for life." Psalm 19:1 came to mind as I wrote this message. "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim his work." The question to ask an atheistic professor is this: how do you explain that the laws of nature are all rational, predictable, make even science possible? Why? And why do they continue to be predictable? If a supernatural mind is not behind the laws of nature, how do you explain their rationality? How do you explain that the laws of nature even exist? And how do you explain that life in this universe is fine-tuned for me to live unless there was a supernatural God who was planning my creation. Now, what I'm trying to establish is that many, many scientists know the problems with unbelief. They know the evidence I've just given you pointing towards the existence of a creator, and yet don't believe. Their reasons for not believing are not scientific, they're emotional. They're an a priori prejudice against it, and they admit it. Let me give you one other quote from Dawkins. Listen to what he admits. Since we cannot accept a transcendent source of life, that is a creator God, since we cannot accept the existence of God, we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance from nothing. What he's making is the argument I just made with you, that nothing cannot create something. He's admitting that. But we choose to believe the impossible. Now, the obvious question that everyone ought to be asking at this point is, why do these very bright scientists refuse to follow the evidence? Why don't they believe in God? Well, let me have them speak for themselves. Aldous Huxley, who was a great champion of Darwinism and evolution, wrote this: "We object to the existence of God because if God existed, he would interfere with our sexual freedom." Sex is my reason for not believing in God. That's ultimately where Huxley comes down. Dawkins says God would prevent us from enjoying our sexual freedom. Not very scientific reasons. You're probably aware that Freud, an atheist, said that belief in God was really merely wish fulfillment, of having a supernatural being who's on our side and would hear our prayers. He doesn't actually exist out there. We just wish he did, and so we invent religion. Comforting. But you know what the truth is? Atheism is the ultimate wish fulfillment. It's a convenient myth. It's wish fulfillment. Now, why do I say that? Simply because if God does not exist, then I'm accountable to no one. And I wish I was accountable to no one. If God does not exist, who takes the place of God? We do. That's a lucky thing. That's a real lucky thing. Because I'm not accountable except to me. There's no longer anyone watching us, and we never have to ever fear being held accountable for our behavior, judgment. Now, often, I want you to just hold that thought, because one of the arguments that is ad nauseum against Christianity is that Christianity is the source of most of the suffering in world history. Now, for an atheist to say that, they never want to talk about the 20th century, because the 20th century is really quite embarrassing to anyone who would make that argument, because it was the bloodiest century by far in history. They'll want to raise up the Spanish Inquisition, which a piddly number of people were killed, just in the dozens or 20s, scores. Whereas in the 20th century, upwards to 500 million people were slaughtered. And who was in charge? The atheists were. Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong. And what they did was, they believed no one was watching and they'd never be accountable. In this book, Berlinski tells a story of in World War II where the Nazis sent out extermination squads to round up Jews, have them dig their own grave and then shoot them. They'd fall in the grave and that'd be it. And he tells a story that this one Hasidic elderly Jew was being made to dig what he knew was his own grave. And standing in front of him was an SS Nazi with his machine gun, and he knew that he was going to be his exterminator. After he had dug his own grave, he stood straight up next to the shovel, and he looked that SS trooper in the eyes and said, "God is watching you." And the SS guy shot him dead. Berlinski writes, what Hitler did not believe and what Stalin did not believe and what Mao Zedong did not believe and what the SS did not believe, what the Gestapo did not believe, and what Nazi doctors did not believe, or communist intellectuals or brown shirts or black shirts, did not believe that God was watching what they were doing. Ideas have consequences. In the last 20 years, we've seen the fastest growing religion to be atheism. Now people are proud of being atheists as somehow being superior intellects. And you see, some people say, the dying of Christianity. And what do we find happening to our families, to our marriages, to our commitments to one another, to ethics and business, the greed that is going on? What do we find happening when people believe God is not watching and they're never accountable? Moral chaos and destruction. Ideas have consequences. If there is no God, there is no accountability for my behavior. I answer to no one. And if there is no accountability, then I can do whatever I want, and I'm dangerous to you. I'm dangerous. You can never really depend on me. Because, as Dawkins says, the selfish gene will take over, and I'll just do what's right for me. It's simply unarguable that believing God does not exist is convenient. It's a wish fulfillment because it means there's no authority in my life. There's another question we must ask, and it's this. Why is the universe fine-tuned for life if there is not a creator? Dawson, Hawking, and the other atheists have no explanation for this at all. They just say it just is. But Christianity says it is because God is love and is generous beyond imagination. Love created the universe. That's what the discovery of a fine-tuned universe teaches me. It leads me there. Creation is the overflow of the love and generosity of Jesus Christ. God does not need worshipers. He doesn't need helpers. It's purely His generous love that anything exists and that it's tuned up for you. The reason God created the universe is simply because He knew He was going to create you and me, and we needed a place to live. We needed a home. Now, I know that may sound simple to a lot of you, but it's where the evidence of a fine-tuned universe for human life leads. And look at how God has created us. You know, the world is so beautiful. Some people even think the Arizona desert's beautiful. I grew up there. I don't think it is, but some people do. And, you know, there's mountains and streams and rivers and color. You know, your dog can't see color. It just sees black and white. God just gave you color eyes. And, you know, your senses, the pleasures that you can enjoy, the smells of roses and the tastes of different foods. This is so wonderful. God did not have to do that. It's just the overflow of His generosity. Remember our scripture this morning. The first sentence of the Bible is in the beginning. God, plural, created the heavens and the earth. Who is this God who created? Well, in John chapter 1, remember how he created? By just speaking a word and light, the Big Bang. Just the word all the way through creation. Well, in John chapter 1, take notice. In the beginning, back to Genesis 1, in the beginning was the Word eternal. And the Word was with God, eternal. And the Word was God, deity. He was with God in the beginning, and through the Word all things were made. He spoke, and there was light. He spoke in different days of creation. And through the Word all things were made. Oh, wait a minute. The Word is not an impersonal force here. The Word is a person, because he was with God. Verse 14 tells us who he was. It says in verse 14, the Word became flesh. Who would that might be? Jesus. The birth of Jesus. The Word became flesh. The Creator God came to earth and became human. The Creator. And made his dwelling with us. This is so incredible. The Creator God became human and dwelt among us, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross to pay the penalty for your sin, that you might be saved and might spend eternity forever with him, and also begin to get cleaned up in your life and to be transformed of self-defeating behaviors. The all-powerful, omnipotent Creator of the universe allowed himself to be crucified on the cross. Love, just the love of God. The Creator crucified is the one I worship. Let that sink in. The only question left, it seems to me, is this. It's not a scientific question, just a personal one. Will you speak up for the Creator who was crucified for you? Lord, I pray that you would give us courage, but also intellectuality and gentleness, but to know why we believe. And Lord, not to be intimidated. I pray that this has strengthened some believers here today. And I pray for others who are not believers that they would dare to have the courage to read some of these books and assimilate information, because, well, it's important. Their eternity depends on it. I pray it in your name, Jesus. Amen.